When people talk about the best redemption arcs in fiction, the number one person brought up from millennials, younger Gen X, and down is probably...
Hello, Zuko here.
Zuko from Avatar: The Last Airbender was always going to have a massive fan base. Broody, complex, endlessly shippable with the entire cast. And they chose to animate this scene like this.
I can take you back to your cell if you've learned your lesson. Yes.
But going beyond just the Byronic superficiality, the fact that we got to, as an audience, watch Zuko's hair not only grow, but his journey from an extension of a genocidal empire to an ally of the Avatar he once tried to kidnap solidified him in pop culture Hall of Fame. Redemption arcs are popular, and we've talked about it before on this channel 3 years ago with the video, Why Are We So Obsessed with Characters Being Redeemed? And I really enjoyed that video, and I think of this as it being an extension of that take. But on my scrolling in the annals of TikTok, it has shown me that people are wondering why so much attention and focus is given to the bad boy TM character who goes through a redemption arc. Shout out to Tell the Bees, who put this whole idea in my brain months ago. Or in the case of some are characters who are massively missing in their redemption because the writer hates teenage girls and refuses to do what's clearly on the page. And there is a point that a lot of the redemption arcs that get hyper praise in fiction are that of male characters. But ladies do get redemption arcs too. When I think of female characters who go through massive redemption journeys, I can name plenty, but there's no denying that they are not as much in the public eye in this discourse outside of the queer community. But I don't think it's simply a issue of writing or popularity of said project. I think it's a bunch of different things together. It ties to the biases that people have about female characters and the shorthand way we want redemption to happen for complicated characters. When it comes to redemption arcs, I feel that not every character needs them. Some characters are best when they're being the absolute worst they can possibly be. Moral goodness is not necessary to make a character compelling, interesting, or worth exploration. One of the downfalls of our current discourse culture and morality and purity in fandom is that it has made it seem as though enjoying bad or complex characters means excusing everything they have done. Sometimes you like a character because they're a little bit hot and interesting. It's fine. There is room for nuance, and some people are cringe online, that is true. But overall, I think people want to turn these things into much bigger encapsulations of personality and identity, rather than just, I attach to this character right now. Pushing for a nuanced view of a character or characters and pushing against the narrative's own morality is not saying what that character was doing is correct, but asking different questions. For example, before I decided to pull away from X the first time, I retweeted a comment that talked about the way that Hama and Jet were treated in Avatar: The Last Airbender. I shared it because I have a lot of feelings about those characters, but especially Hama. I remember watching The Puppet Master, and I rewatched it for this video, and feeling a lot of empathy for Hama. Her actions were not good. She was harming civilians, and that was a morally bad thing to do. And I also think that when discussing a character who was once themselves a civilian and then due to her abilities was captured and tortured by her colonial oppressors and ended up having a total mental breakdown and now acts on that revenge and hatred, that is something that I, on a certain level, get. I'm a descendant of chattel slavery in the Caribbean. Violent slave uprisings are part of why I have freedom today. Jet is someone who grew up under an ethnic cleansing occupation that allowed him to start to view even his own communities as expendable in order to achieve peace. These are realistic realities and perspectives of people who grow up in these environments. And while the show is good at putting the good guys, the gang, against the Fire Nation soldiers in order to show them violently opposing the system, what we don't really see are Fire Nation citizens themselves opposing these systems. We rarely get an opportunity to see anyone in the Fire Nation actively resisting. We don't see any underground resistance of any kind really from civilians in the Fire Nation, which shows that they are at a certain level culpable in what's happening, even passively. Yes, they are dealing with propaganda, but people push back against propaganda. We are seeing those kind of things right now. Where are the people who are pushing up against these ideals, and why don't the gang ever interact with them? Let's not forget that when we have characters like Ira, who is the beloved uncle figure and considered to be by many like the moral center of the series, he is a war criminal who fully embraced being the future Fire Lord until his son Lu Ten died during the siege of Ba Sing Se, which lasted 600 days. A siege of 600 days means at least some people died. I know people like to push back on this, but the goal of a siege is to cut off supplies and aid and essential things. Like, he was responsible for people dying.
If the city is as magnificent as its wall, Ba Sing Se must be something to behold. I hope you all may see it someday, if we don't burn it to the ground first.
Zuko and Iroh are both noble characters with ties to the Fire Nation who are allowed to become better. Meanwhile, characters like Hama and Jet are turned into violent, hateful people because of the actions of their oppressors. Having empathy for them, wanting the narrative to understand that, wanting an audience to understand that, it isn't saying that Zuko and Iroh can't be redeemed or that Hama and Jet should be redeemed. It's asking for a deeper conversation about the holes within a story, or not even holes, but about the different ways that people can feel about the way violent resistance is shown and the ways in which people can feel it's incomplete. And I think that's why that dialogue was so interesting to me, because it's not about redeeming Hama. It's not about redeeming Jet to me. It is about asking the questions of, is it okay to show people hate their oppressors and not forgive them? And at what point does the oppression that you face turn you into someone who dehumanizes others? And while that's not the way that we want to see people do things, while that's not the ideal way you want things to be dealt with in a situation, it is also a part of that reality, and I think that's worth discussing. And I think because redemption becomes shorthand for that nuance or a nuanced characterization, without it, people don't take the step to interrogate, and I think that is a mistake. Redemption is not a shorthand for the harm that it's caused, but for many it becomes a way of saying who we think deserves the perceived capacity to change or not. Azula is probably a great example of this because people are very split about whether or not she should or should not be redeemed. I'm pretty sure a video came out about this a couple of weeks ago. For some, she's a great villain who has all the signs of violence and malevolence since she was a child. There's no need for her to be redeemed because she doesn't seek it. For others, she is canonically 14 years old, feels abandoned by her mother, and if being a war criminal is a line that goes beyond crossing for redemption, well, two others have already crossed it within her own family and have found a way back.
My own mother thought I was a monster. She was right, of course, but it still hurt.
I don't think either perspective is right or wrong. Azula is my favorite character on the show. Duh. I'm bisexual. So I have a lot of empathy for her in the sense that she is 14 and she was, to use the meme, the worst person in the world's favorite daughter. And redemption, in my opinion, wouldn't take away from her character because I think being this tragic antagonistic force in Zuko's life is satisfying enough as a narrative. But I also can see why it would be nice to see a redemption arc in the series for a female character, especially since the comics just kind of give Zuko a replacement sister anyway, and then try to make her fully mentally ill. It's a mess. But essentially, when redemption becomes shorthand for maybe this character deserves a little bit more attention, you wonder why others get it and some don't. You wonder what it's saying about the moral texture, the storytelling of the narrative. And I think what we really should start doing is accept that every character, whether we get a redemption arc or not, has room to explore things about them. It just not might be the focus of the series. But it does suck when it happens a lot to the female characters. But knowing how to tell the difference between a character you hate and a bad character requires media literacy. Thankfully, there's an app that helps with that. Ground News. Ground News is a website and app developed by a former NASA engineer on a mission to give readers an easy, data-driven, objective way to read the news. On Ground News, each story comes with a visual breakdown of the political bias, factuality, and ownership. It also makes it easier at a glance to see how certain words and phrases are used to frame a narrative. Since I started using Ground News, it has become my go-to place for international and local news, but mostly international. In addition to what's going on in Gaza and the election, I've been trying to stay more educated on situations like the Congo and Sudan, places that are also going through major crises. Right now in Sudan, there was a tragic dam burst that took the lives of many and left many missing. When we look at the sources, we can see that there has been factual issues with the story. The death total on certain publications has been set on 30 and on others 60. We have 115 articles with 24 from the left, 18 center, and 14 right. And you can see on the bias distribution how this compares and how people are telling the narrative about what's going on there. I really appreciate this kind of information just as someone who cares about the news, but also to kind of understand what is needing to be combated when we talk about international incidents. We have a lot of unclear sources, we have a lot of misinformation. We have to make sure that we're doing our part to at least know what's going on. And when you see all of these mixed numbers, it makes you want to do your own research just inherently. If anything, to make you savvy about looking out for dog whistles and buzzwords. If you're looking for a new app that'll help you sift through daily misinformation, Ground News is the way to go. I'm offering 40% off their Vantage subscription. You can only access this discount through my link. So go to ground.news/princessweeks or click on the link description and support an independent news platform working to make the media landscape more transparent.
You break the rules and become a hero. I do it and I become the enemy. That doesn't seem fair.
For a lot of stories, a wicked woman was an antagonist to be humbled, defeated, and overcome. There's also Meg from Hercules, which is probably, for me, Baby's first redemption arc, where she literally sold her soul to save her boyfriend's life, and then he fucked her over as they are wont to do. She did nothing wrong. We love her.
Look, I learned my lesson, okay?
When I personally think about female redemption arcs in pop culture, my mind goes to Xena from Xena Warrior Princess. Xena is a spin-off of the show Hercules' Legendary Journeys, where Xena first appeared and was a warlord. Through the power of healing cock, she is turned into goodness. She sees the light from Kevin Sorbo's penis. The last time that's ever happened, canonically, it's true. And she goes on an adventure with her illegal wife, Gabrielle, and just tries to make amends for the harm that she's caused. The show often forces Xena to come to terms with the consequences of her actions across the world and having to prove her changed behavior and to do good things even when she's not rewarded for it. She's seen to relapse, to still be flawed due to her own predilections for violence and situations. And Xena herself never thinks she deserves redemption, but she's going to continue to do the right thing because she knows that she does have blood in her ledger. The most impactful antagonist she has is a woman named Callisto, whose family was killed by Xena when she was a child. This was later retconned. I don't care for it.
You tell me, Xena, do you sleep well at night?
No, I don't.
Good. Well, I can take whatever it is you think I have coming to me. But you tell me this, Xena. Have you ever been tried for all of the things you have done?
This is, to me, the template of what a redemption journey for a woman can look like, especially one that's at the forefront of the narrative and cares about the character. And I think what's so important about Xena and why I bring her up often in this conversation is because Xena is, in many ways, even before Buffy, the precursor of having a female character that lives in multiple different identities and gets to be seen in this engaging way. The flaws she has, what she's dealing with, the moral ambiguity, the sexual ambiguity, all of these things help make her an interesting character. And her redemption arc is always present. But because you care about her, you take the time to explore her, and she is the overall good that we follow, you are taught to have empathy for her. But I think what I love about it and what I see as a flaw in a character that we will bring up later is that her being sad about it is never seen to supersede the tangible destruction that she's caused. And I think that's really the key. There's a way in which sometimes when character gets redeemed, the writers stop remembering what they did and why people should be mad at them. You know, sometimes you deserve to get called out for what you did in Camelot, Regina. We'll get to you. Xena doesn't fall into that trap often. She really does have to take the L. And I think the ability to do that is what makes her a stronger character in the end. To stop this from becoming a mess of rambles, I'm going to focus on 2 redemption arcs featuring women I think were done well and one I think wasn't.
Hey, Adora. How's it hanging?
So it was brought to my attention on Patreon that I didn't actually describe these shows. I think I had a gay brain and just was so excited to be doing a slightly lighter video. So, this voice will pop in to correct that from time to time. She-Ra and the Princesses of Power is an animated series that ran on Netflix from 2018 to 2020. It's a reboot of the 1985 series that was very short-lived but popular, featuring Adora, a soldier who leaves the evil horde after receiving a magical sword and finding the power of friendship that transforms her into the legendary warrior She-Ra, and explores the complex relationships between all of these characters, particularly between Adora and her former best friend turned rival, Catra. In many ways, Catra should have had Zuko levels of attention, and I think certainly in some queer spaces she does, but I think with streaming, it's harder for shows to remain in the public sphere, but I think Catra is a really important character in this conversation. When you look at Catra, we see a character who is a teenager, brown-coated, who is an extension of a military empire that is trying to assimilate the world, and we see in multiple flashbacks that Catra was horribly, physically, and emotionally abused. As a result, she is very self-destructive and codependent emotionally. For me, it was always very clear that Catra was hurt on multiple fronts because A, Adora's passivity in fully protecting her from Shadowheart, their maternal figure, and B, the fact that Adora realized that the Horde was evil when someone else told her and didn't realize that after watching years of Catra's suffering. That insecurity cut deep. And even though I know everyone loves Scorpia, Scorpia continually crossed emotional and physical boundaries that Catra set. You know, toxic positivity is a thing. Both Zuko and Catra have this inability in the first parts of their arc to say sorry, to actually do the good that they want to do. Yet I always saw people super radicalized on Catra needing to have better atonement, and that it seemed too fast in the series. I think that if you break down the episodes of redemption, it's about the same for her as Zuko, but as an ex of mine made really clear one time, Catra's competence when she briefly gives in to becoming evil makes it seem as though that's her true nature. Zuko is very bad at being a bad boy because he's not. He's just a little nugget with daddy issues. Catra has mommy issues, but she's good at being an antagonist. She causes Glimmer's mother's death, which is a huge thing that's held against her, rightfully so. She's active in the Horde's conquest, and I think this elevation of her as an antagonist in the narrative makes people believe she is worse and therefore has to do more to try and fix that. I've also talked about this long ago, but I think sometimes when narratives are constantly trying to up the stakes in these shows, especially a fantasy, they forget that if we are supposed to eventually like these characters, pathos is not enough. However, I do think that Zuko's lack of talent in being evil belies the fact that just because he's not competent doesn't mean he's still not complicit. When he decides to go back to the Fire Nation especially, that back and forth is interesting, but he is still complicit in horrible things. Zuko's actions almost facilitate Aang's death. Thank God for Katara, but that shit could have ended badly, and for a while he probably thought Aang was dead. Catra redeems herself over time, but we see her constantly fail at overcoming her own vices and hurt, which I think is actually really great storytelling. When she finally is able to see that she can't move forward in this path anymore, she sacrifices herself for others, which translates into something that we've seen Catra not be able to do. And I think that could we have and should we have spent more time on Catra's redemption? Absolutely. But we also know that behind the scenes, because of the queer storytelling, there's a lot of effort and compromises to get Catra's storyline where it is. But I think we simply don't give enough credit to the fact that this is a story about a teenage girl who is trying to run forward despite years of emotional trauma. And we give Zuko so many chances despite his complicity. So why not Catra? And that grace isn't given. I think that's the nuance that we have to be aware of what's happening.
Thanks, B. Couldn't have done it without you.
Buffy the Vampire Slayer is a supernatural drama that aired from 1997 to 2003. It follows Buffy Summers, a teenage girl who is chosen to fight vampires as the Slayer. Vampires, demons, and other supernatural forces. It is a trailblazing show, iconic, fuck Joss Whedon though, and it deals with a lot of the complexities of high school being hell, but also just the way light and dark resonate within a person. Faith is one of the most fascinating characters in that series. If you follow me on X, you know I've been like doing Buffy shit posts. This is the reason why. She's introduced in season 3 as a successor to Kendra, who was murdered by the vampire Drusilla in season 2. Justice for Kendra. Kendra's life mattered. We need a Kendra spin-off comic all the time. Faith is situated as the dark slayer to Buffy's light. It works aesthetically because Elijah Dushku's dark hair and eyes in comparison to Sarah Michelle Gellar's demure features create a good contrast. Faith comes from a more working class, poor background with a troubled past. She's more violent, sexual, and morally gray in comparison to Buffy, who has a lot of middle class privileges. On a certain level, these choices can feel very hypersexualized, especially considering the way those aspects of Faith's personality, especially the sexually forward ones, are used to make her the bad one.
I'm 5x5 here, B, living entirely large. Actually wondering about your problem.
Well, I may not sleep in the nude and wrestle alligators.
Maybe it's time you started, because obviously something in your bottle needs uncorking.
That paired with the whole if Angel and Buffy have sex, it makes Angel evil thing. The sexual politics in Buffy are very complicated, not always great, but here we are. Even while being tragically straight, there's this very sapphic connection between Buffy and Faith that I truly believe would have been played more with if Faith was a man. Faith is exactly Buffy's type, down to the leather. And while yes, Willow was a lesbian by the time the series ended, it was like a very different thing in the 2000s and 90s to have your main character be a bisexual, lesbian, queer character versus a supporting character like Willow. So I'm just like, we deserved Fluffy and they were cowards. Like, I love you, Bangle. We've had like really good times together, but now in the year of our Lord 2024, I ship Faith and Buffy now. That's my OTP. It is what it is. But even with that, from the start, we see, much like Kendra was, Faith is lonely. And while being a slayer has given her a purpose, it has also fed her violent tendencies. This all reaches a tipping point when Faith kills Alan Finch, a human who was previously aligned with the big bad of that season, the mayor, something that none of the heroes knew at the time. As Faith becomes further and further in her denial about killing an actual human being, she leans on violence more and becomes aligned with the big bad of the season, the mayor, and he becomes her support system because more than anything, Faith wants to feel needed, cared for. She seeks validation from someone, even evil. She has
daddy issues, chaos junkie.
Faith's storyline in Buffy is very dark because she essentially goes on this path of murder, sexual assault, and pain as a way to carve out a purpose for herself. The mayor is able to give her comfort and purpose wrapped up in this earnest, dark paternal love. But what really gets her is the fact that Buffy is resistant to that dark pull, that she doesn't give into the idea that being a slayer means getting whatever you want at no cost, that Buffy is so loved, it makes her Faith act even more childish and picks at her pre-existing trauma over and over again.
Why, Faith? What's in it for you?
What isn't? You know, I come to Sunnydale. I'm a slayer. I do my job kicking ass better than anyone. But what do I hear about everywhere I go? Buffy.
When she's put in a coma and then bi-switches with Buffy and she and Riley have sex, which we would consider in this instance to be. During the act, Riley says he loves Buffy while Faith is in her body, and it makes her have a total mental breakdown because the idea of receiving love, pure love, is just so separate from what she accepts from herself, from what she expects of herself to deserve. And then when she and Buffy have their body swap confrontation, you can just hear her say to herself that she's ugly, she's evil, she's dark.
You're nothing! Disgusting! Murderous bitch! You're nothing!
There's so much self-loathing wrapped into that character that really comes through in that scene, and it's so impactful. The continuation of Faith's storyline happens on the spin-off series Angel. She flees to Los Angeles and is hired to kill Angel. But she can't just do that. No, the overachiever in her says that she has to punch Cordelia, and then she kidnaps and tortures Wesley. Faith breaks down during her fight with Angel, and this is the beginning of her redemption arc, truly.
I'm evil! I'm bad! I'm evil! You hear me? I'm bad! Angel, I'm bad! I'm bad! You hear me? I'm bad! I'm bad!
Angel tries to help her and Buffy arrives feeling betrayed about Angel trying to redeem Faith. It's a whole big blowout. Faith decides after Buffy helps her escape from some of the Watchers to go to jail. And she goes to jail for like 4 seasons. What I really enjoy about Angel and Faith's bond is that it makes sense that Angel would want to help Faith. Angel was a vampire who killed countless people and only stopped because he was cursed with a soul. Angel got forced into changing. He didn't choose it for himself. And if he loses his soul again, he will go back to exactly where he was before. Staying in recovery is his job, but he got a cheat code to jumpstart that. So he wants better for Faith, and he chooses to believe in her as an extension of the grace others have had to give him. Buffy naturally feels different because while Angel has been harmed by Faith physically, what Faith did to Buffy is so much more intimate, personal violence. I don't think that Buffy had any responsibility to help Faith, but she tries her best to help Faith get on the path. And I think that's really important to say that just because a person changes, they redeem themselves, you don't have to forgive them. And it feels like Faith gets that as the series progresses on both Buffy and Angel. Her final arc into Reform Slayer on the show is awkward because season 7 of Buffy is bad and weird, but I think they spend a lot of time showing us that Faith wanted to change, accepted responsibility, ate that crow really well, and comes back as a better person.
There's only supposed to be one. Maybe that's why you and I can never get along. We're not supposed to exist together.
Also, you and Evelyn were killing people.
Good point. Also a factor.
What's interesting about Faith while I was rewatching this is that due to everyone being in their 20s, it's sometimes easy to forget that Faith is meant to be in her late teens. And I think that they push the envelope a lot in that way. But I do appreciate that in this show, where 2 of the major love interests are vampires with body counts higher than the Eiffel Tower, Faith is also given the room to find redemption both passively and actively. For Faith, being a Slayer was like an addictive rush, and learning to be the responsible part of the Slayer was part of her path. As a mirror for Buffy, her actions were taken seriously, but there was also room for understanding. Throughout the series, we see so many characters be tempted by darkness, lured into darkness, but the series always said that there could be hope for those kind of people. And I think that's part of the reason why it makes Buffy so interesting. Base Redemption is great because it took its time, really took Faith's character seriously and managed to add layers to her personality without fundamentally shifting her into someone different. I do reject the comic canon ending where she and Buffy become cops. Faith was ACAB. No. Well, those were 2 good redemption stories. So let's get into the one that I don't think works.
I don't want this life.
You're just frightened of having all that power.
I don't want power. I want to be free.
Power is freedom.
Once Upon a Time is a fantasy drama series that aired from 2011 to 2018, and honestly, it seemed longer than that. The show intertwines classical fairy tale characters with a modern-day twist, featuring Emma Swan, who discovers that she is the daughter of Snow White and Prince Charming, but is brought into Storybrooke by her long-lost son, who is the adoptive son of the evil queen. The series goes back and forth to do twists on classic fairy tales, and also talking about good and evil, redemption, hope, and the 2 great evils of the series, or just constant antagonists, are Rumpelstiltskin and the evil queen, Regina Mills. This is a hard one for me because I used to be a rabid watcher once upon a time. That and Scandal just defined so many of like my weekly watching things. And I kept up with it consistently until the Frozen season. I had to walk away then. Slight tangent, but I was recently stuck at JFK when I had to make a flight for work. And while I was on that little thing where you're like, it's like walking for you or whatever, I turned and looked this way and I looked right into Bellamy Young's eyes, and I was just like, that's Millie Grant. And she had like her dog with her, and I was like, because I love Millie. I'm sorry. I'm a Millie defender to my deepest core. So like that totally blew my mind. And so like I'm walking and like I'm trying to call my mom because all the flights are canceled, and I turn around and it's Lana Parrilla. And like when I tell you, hand to God, I was trembling because it was like the ABC block had come right for me. It was already a messy day. My flight got canceled. I had to go home. I had too many Aperol spritz. And then Black Jesus himself gave me 2 treats. Back to the script. Regina Mills was my favorite character because Ana Priya played the character so well and with so much emotion that I really, at the time, justified her beefing with a small child. I still kind of do personally. I think that I have a lot of empathy for characters who are abused by their trusted figures and don't rise above it. I think rising above abuse is noble. I was raised in Catholic school, so I do have a soft spot for martyrs, but people who are hardened by that experience, I have a lot of empathy for that because I have a lot of guilt, so I don't do that. So when I see characters that don't have that ability and just kind of like pop off, I'm like, aspirational.
I did cast a curse that devastated an entire population. I have tortured and murdered. I've done some terrible things. I should be overflowing with regret, but I'm not.
With Regina, every season, for a certain point, they would show how much emotional depth Regina was capable of, but then backslide her into doing something truly horrible, or bring up something horrible that she did, and then Regina will make a sad face, and it's supposed to be enough. And like, for me it was, because I'm a simp, but logically, no. Regina is responsible for like a melange of war crimes, slaughter of villages, children, but she loves her son and had a horrible childhood. And I want to make this clear. Regina is someone who is a victim and a victimizer. She was emotionally and physically abused. Her mentors were her abusive mom and her abusive mom's ex, who also slept with her evil sister and is the grandfather of her son. The show is bad. The show is bad. And Regina has not had the best setup for success, but still the premise of the show versus where the characters go is so out of whack. When you watch the first season of Once Upon a Time, it doesn't feel like the series necessarily wants to redeem Regina. I rewatched the episode where we find out why she's angry at Snow White, and it's silly. Regina's emotions are valid, but the whole concept is ridiculous. Like, the evil queen is a one-note character in Snow White, and it makes sense to try and elevate that character into something deeper, but fundamentally making Regina an 18-year-old who holds a grudge at this level against a small child is like irrational, lazy, and kind of sexist storytelling. Regina could have a much better redemption if I felt like that was a plan from the start, or if the writers seemed to care about the collateral damage of her actions. You can't spend entire first few seasons reminding us that she's done so many horrible things and then speed run through her arc because she's a fan favorite. It doesn't help that the consequences to her actions are always framed around taking something away from her, like losing something, like Henry or Robin. Like, she's hardly ever made to be good for the sake of being good. It's always because she fundamentally wants something for herself. She's selfish, and I love that about her, but doesn't need her to be the good queen though. Like, it's a lot going on there that doesn't really click. And I remember the episode that really made me realize, okay, I love Regina, but like, we have to use our brain here. It was like when they were in Camelot, and like this guy whose family had been murdered by Regina was like angry at her, and every time we would see Regina, she'd just be like, sad face, sad face, sad face. And again, the simp in me is like, sad face, Regina, like, how could you be mad at her? She bae. But like, the logical part of me is like, yeah, you did slaughter his entire family. Like, when is Regina going to pay reparations? When is she going to have to do something deeper to really give back to the community for what she has done? Like, the idea of her becoming a better person because she had a son is a good storyline, especially with her own dislike of her own stepdaughter being a whole thing and how they're interconnected. And like, that's all really interesting, but it's the same issue I have with Rumpelstiltskin, who is a great character, but at a certain point, it's like, you want this character to be too many things. You want him to be like the romantic lead and also be the great evil, but also have all this kind of stuff going. And like, the two best actors you have on the show are playing the antagonists, and that was really your mistake. You should have done something different, like, or at least let them just be like these like godlike evil creatures, because that makes more sense for them. The rest of it is just kind of like messy and inconsistent, and I think it's a mixture of not knowing how to redeem that, but also I think when it comes to Regina specifically, that was a character who I feel strongly should have died. Not because I wanted her to, but narratively, like, her story is one where she gets better, redeems herself, and then dies. And I think that if I wasn't so tied to her from a fandom perspective, I think if Once Upon a Time hadn't been such a white show, and so the one Latina character that was there, I was like, I want her to win. I hate the fact that her, you know, parental rights are always being mistreated. There's so much subtext to Regina because of who is playing her and the dynamics of like her being a Latina and the rest of the Charmings being like the whitest family in town, that made me a lot more invested in her story, that if she had just been like a regular white girl, I probably would not have cared, because I would have thought she was super ridiculous. But there is an element of her being an other in this very white space that is engaging, but that's not really engaged in the story itself. So rather than have like this really full, you know, this really well done redemption for this Latina character, it just kind of feels like they realized she was popular, had to do a little bit of changes, and so we just kind of go, she loses her power, she gets them back, she's good, she has a boyfriend, she loses it, and just round and round we go. And thankfully Lana is so charismatic, the characters do forgive her enough that we get to have redemption. But again, I've never felt satisfied by it. I'm happy when she's happy, but they never wrote it well. And I think that's the biggest thing, because it's all there, the potential is there, but it just never sticks the landing. And I think it's because they were genuinely afraid to acknowledge how bad she was. And if you remembered it on any sort of rational level, like, it's hard to gel those two things. Trigger warning, we're going to be talking about female on male sexual assault here, just briefly. One of the things that I feel connects two of these characters in Faith and Regina is the sexual assault on men that happens from both of those women to men in the series. And the sad reality is that despite these actions clearly being harmful and dangerous, it doesn't feel like they're taken that seriously, especially in the case of like Regina and Once Upon a Time. Once Upon a Time has female on male 3 times, and it's disgusting because they literally they never acknowledge it, and it's horrible. And I feel in the case of Faith, it was also dark because it's during her of Riley that she gets an emotional crisis and feels weird and uncomfortable about how she feels, you know. And I feel like there's this desire to make darker antagonistic women sexually violent, but then not actually treat the violence that they do seriously. And so when you have a female character that is engaging in sexual violence, doing, you know, really harmful things relationship wise, I think about Willow from Buffy again, there's not a lot of recourse done to correct that kind of behavior. And so as a viewer, you're waiting for that to happen. And like, again, we're also talking about an era of television where like a lot of casual essay was happening very upsettingly. But I think especially with female characters, they are either victims of sexual assault or they are perpetrators of it, and it's never fully discussed because it's never taken seriously, and that really fucking sucks. Last year, Discussing Film tweeted the 10 most hated television characters according to 200,000 votes, and number 3, right after Ramsay Bolton and right before Shao Tucker, was Skylar White from Breaking Bad. And that's the kicker, because how can we even begin to discuss the nuances of female characters, the darkness, the redemptions, the complexity, when y'all put Skylar White above someone who turned his daughter into a dog for a job? Back when I did that video about redemption, I talked about how people put Sansa Stark as having a great redemption arc. Character development is not the same as redemption. Your irrational hatred of a female character is not the same thing as them needing to change. Making a mistake that gets your own pet killed because you feared snitching on the crown prince is not the same thing as having a coup and getting 2 little boys killed. Sansa's season 1 characterization is meant to illuminate the realities of the world of Westeros, that she was manipulated by the ideals of society and nobility to assume she could trust in people over her own family. The idea that she trusted, as her father taught her to, in law and order, and it failed her. That is the point. Just because Arya also exists doesn't mean Sansa was ignorant. Martin has said that neither sister could have survived the other's struggles. They serve different narrative purposes. Too often, because of sexism, female characters who are placed as foils to male characters are treated as if they need to come to heel in order to be good. You see this with Laurel from Arrow. Never mind that if you watch season 1 and 2 back to back, it makes it very clear that Oliver Queen is 10,000% in the wrong no matter what he does. I'll hate that man forever. I will always hate that man. The story then decides that due to Laura's lack of popularity, they need to treat her as if she needed to be redeemed for feeling upset and having poor coping mechanisms, humbling her consistently because she was in the way of the male character. People can respect the nuances and layers to a character like Endeavor, who's a horrible parent, and I also like Endeavor, so I'm talking about myself. But then also take a character like Rose Quartz and decide that she's the devil, even though she's equally as nuanced, throwing these female characters completely out because you don't like them. You know, people will say they want nuanced female characters and then say that Princess Bubblegum is a fascist, even though she literally has fair and open elections and loses to a fascist and doesn't stage a coup, which I don't know, girl, you could have done that, Bonnabelle, but that's just me. And that's why even when there's an opportunity to have a layered depiction of 2 morally gray, complex female characters, we still get House of the Dragon season 2. But that's the next video.
Gentlemen, I'm addressing them, undressing them, got elegance, means not quite yet to be eloquent, get it then, that's good, you could be my guest, so let's take it to a fancy dinner, after we dine, I'm dancing with ya, name's June, and I got a rose, but I gotta go do what, I don't know, but you're not the one, hey, shout outs to Adam, OG Vibe Crew, I am not working on never living ever to get a chick. Is that much work? Whatever, bitch. Friend zone, yeah, go both ways. I'm a bright side looking, bright-eyed student, sideline looking for discoveries with the guys and women couples, but I'm good looking enough. And fighting for love is overrated. There are other things I can do. Chilling with Adam, eating White Castle. Love ain't a game, more like a raffle. Gold tickets ain't gotten by skill, hard work or will. For real, you find them in chocolate. Ha ha. Bust out the Cheetos, we that, cause we ain't the heroes. Well, the dudes drinking Mountain Dew, feeling pretty good about it all, and actually a pissed off. It's the small things that you eat when you're broken and your heart feels like it's beat. Crush the shit off, cause I'm talking about a feast. So what's it gonna be? You want a number 3 from Blanco Portrait. On a date, make ladies swoon. Laying at a park, gaze at the moon. Smooth, in a poetic spot. You know I get her to talk, to put her head to my cut. That is not me, I am sloppy. I fuck up like witty one lines and drop things. Not to over-exaggerate, but who'll get over a girl I master break. Dancing and walking off, it will pass on and off. I love this girl, God only knows that's okay, cause I like roads. I like walking and I hate pity, long as I got my friends with me. Sooner or later I gotta get lucky. What I don't get is why I am drowning. Not caught in it, like that kid, and trails infinite, and quitting at a limit, but a limit so much I can take. I'm really kidding when I kick it at the end of the day. That's all I can do, all there is to it. On to the next one after the music. I'm still June and I got a rose, but I gotta go do what? I don't know, but she's not. It's the